Turn the lights down and get comfortable. Tonight's story begins in the dark. Before we start, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what kind of stories keep you up at night. I had been a park ranger for just over 7 years when the Deepwoods assignment came through, long enough to know the difference between a quiet forest and a listening one. The transfer paperwork called it a temporary coverage detail, nothing more than filling in for a short-staffed district after an early winter storm knocked out access roads. The name of the place barely registered at first, Blackpine National Forest, but the moment I stepped out of my truck at the southern access gate, something in my chest tightened in a way I couldn't explain. The air smelled wrong. Not rotten, not smoky, just heavy. Pine sap and damp earth mixed with an underlying metallic sharpness, like cold rain on old tools. My breath fogged faintly, even though it was early afternoon. The forest canopy so dense it filtered the light into a permanent twilight. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the cold sat low, clinging to the ground and seeping through my boots. The gate behind me creaked as it closed, the sound carrying far longer than it should have. No birds answered it, no wind followed, just silence settling back into place, thick as felt. Blackpine was deep woods, miles from the nearest town, older growth than most parks, trees so tall and tightly packed that even the service roads felt like tunnels carved through something alive. I checked my radio out of habit. Static hissed back, then a brief pulse of interference that almost sounded like breathing before the signal cleared. Probably the storm damage, I told myself. The ranger station sat another mile in, a low structure half swallowed by trees. Moss crept up the wooden siding like a slow tide, and the windows reflected the forest instead of the sky. Inside, the air was stale and cold, carrying the scent of old paper, dust, and something faintly animal. A heater clicked on after a few tries, coughing warm air that did little to chase the chill. The logbook lay open on the desk. The last entry was dated 3 weeks earlier, written in a steady hand that trailed off mid-sentence. Patrol notes normal. Heard movement beyond boundary markers again at... That was it. No signature, no follow-up. I stood there longer than necessary, listening. The building creaked softly as it warmed, wood popping and settling. Somewhere outside, far off, a sound moved through the trees. Not footsteps, not wind, more like something large brushing against trunks, slow and deliberate. I told myself it was an elk, or a fallen branch shifting under its own weight. Still, I locked the door before nightfall.
Night in Blackpine did not arrive the way it did in other forests. There was no gradual dimming, no soft shift from gray to blue. One moment, the trees were shapes and shadows. The next, they were walls of black, the sky above them swallowed whole. The ranger station lights hummed weakly, casting a shallow pool of yellow that stopped short of the windows, as if the darkness outside resisted being pushed back. I logged the day's arrival notes, my pen scratching louder than it should have on the paper, each stroke sounding final in the quiet. The radio crackled once, then went still. I ate a cold meal from my pack, barely tasting it, the air inside the station carrying that same faint animal scent, stronger now, warm and musky, like fur left too long in rain. Around 9, something brushed the side of the building. Not hard, just enough to make the walls shiver. I froze, breath caught halfway in. A branch, I told myself. The forest was full of branches. Still, I listened. The sound came again, slower this time, dragging along the wood before stopping near the corner of the station. I waited for the scrape of bark, the snap of twigs, anything familiar. Nothing followed. Minutes passed. The heater clicked. My heart slowly found its rhythm again. I made my first perimeter check just after 10, flashlight cutting a narrow tunnel through the dark. The beam caught tree trunks slick with moisture, their bark shining like skin. My boots sank slightly into the ground with each step, the soil soft and cold, releasing the smell of decay and wet leaves. Somewhere beyond the light, something exhaled. It was low and steady, not sharp enough to be a growl, not wet enough to be breath fogging in cold air. It stopped when I stopped. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the tree line. The forest stared back, silent and unmoving. No eyes reflected, no shapes shifted. I finished the check faster than protocol recommended and returned inside, locking the door again. I wrote down the noise in the logbook, choosing my words carefully, keeping them reasonable. Possible animal activity near the station, no visual confirmation. The pen hesitated before I set it down. For the first time since I'd arrived, a thought surfaced uninvited and unwelcome. Whatever was moving out there knew where the station was.
Sleep came in thin, shallow stretches, the kind that left me more tired than before. Every time I drifted off, the forest seemed to draw closer, the station's walls creaking under a weight that never quite pressed hard enough to be real. Sometime after midnight, a sound cut through the dark, sharp and deliberate. 3 slow taps against the window. Not scratching, not wind. Taps, evenly spaced, patient. I lay still on the cot, staring at the ceiling, counting my breaths. The smell inside the station had changed, the animal musk stronger now, layered with damp soil and something sour, like old leaves left to rot in water. Another tap came, closer to the corner of the glass, followed by a long pause. I reached for the radio, thumb hovering over the transmit button. Static filled the room, louder than before, rising and falling in a rhythm that made my skin crawl. Beneath it, faint but unmistakable, was a sound like distant footsteps moving through snow, slow and careful. I shut the radio off. The tapping stopped. Morning came without relief. The forest was gray and still, the light dull and cold, as if the sun itself avoided the canopy. I stepped outside and immediately saw the marks, deep impressions in the soil just beyond the station, too wide for any animal I could name, the edges smooth, pressed down rather than torn. They circled the building once before trailing off into the trees. I crouched beside one, the earth inside still darker, still damp, fresh. I took photos, measured the distance between impressions, and forced myself to write it all down. Unknown tracks, possibly large mammal, direction of travel inconclusive. The words felt thin on the page. As I followed the trail a short distance into the woods, the forest swallowed the marks completely, the ground returning to its undisturbed state as if nothing had passed through. The silence pressed in again, broken only by my own breathing. Then I noticed something else. No small tracks, no deer prints crossing the area, no birds calling from the branches above. Whatever had come through had cleared the forest ahead of it, leaving an emptiness that felt intentional. I turned back toward the station, unease settling heavy in my gut. Halfway there, the smell returned, thick and close, and I realized it was coming from behind me. I did not look back.
I made it back to the station without running, though every instinct pushed me to. Inside, the door closed with a hollow thud that echoed through the building, and I slid the bolt into place with more force than necessary. The smell lingered, clinging to my clothes, to my hair, like it had soaked into me rather than the air. I checked myself for blood or torn fabric and found none, yet my hands shook as if I'd narrowly avoided something violent. The rest of the morning passed in uneasy routine. I logged weather conditions, checked trail cameras, and attempted radio contact with the district office. Each call dissolved into static, the signal breaking apart before any words could carry through. Around midday, I reviewed the camera footage. Most of it showed nothing but empty trails and shifting shadows. Then, on the camera near boundary marker 3, something moved. It crossed the frame too slowly to be a glitch, too smoothly to be wind. The shape was tall, narrow, its outline blurring at the edges like it didn't quite belong in the image. No features showed, just a darker vertical mass passing between the trees. The timestamp read 02:14, the same hour as the tapping. I paused the footage, zoomed in until the pixels broke apart. At the edge of the frame, one tree bent slightly inward, its bark scraped clean in a long, pale streak. Whatever passed had been close enough to touch it. I shut the monitor off. The forest outside had gone quiet again. Not the natural quiet of snow or distance, but a held silence, like a breath drawn in and not released. Late in the afternoon, I found the rule sheet. It was folded inside the back cover of the logbook, paper yellowed and soft at the edges. No header, no official seal, just a list written in the same careful hand as the unfinished entry. Do not respond to sounds near the station after dark. Do not follow tracks that end abruptly. Do not attempt to photograph it directly. If you hear your name, remain inside. The last line was underlined twice. If it stands upright, you are already too close. I stared at the words until they blurred, a slow cold spreading through my chest. There was no mention of what it was, no explanation, just instructions written by someone who had learned them the hard way. As the light began to fade again, I realized with a tightening knot of dread that I had already broken 2 of the rules.
Dusk settled heavier than before, the gray light draining away until the forest looked bruised, deep purples and blacks pressing in from every direction. I double-checked every lock, every window, every gap where the outside might slip through. The station felt smaller now, its walls closer, the ceiling lower, the air thick with that damp animal smell that refused to fade. I kept the rule sheet on the desk in front of me, reading it over and over, as if repetition might reveal something hidden between the lines. When darkness finally took hold, the sounds began. At first it was subtle, a faint shifting far out among the trees, the quiet snap of branches bending under careful pressure. Then came the footsteps. They were wrong in a way that made my teeth ache. Too slow, too evenly spaced, each one placed with deliberate patience, as if whoever or whatever made them knew exactly where it was going. They circled the station once, twice, never rushing, never stopping long enough for me to pinpoint a direction. The lights flickered. My radio hissed to life on its own, static rolling through the room in low waves. Beneath it, faint and distant, I heard something else. A voice. Not clear words at first, just the shape of speech, the cadence familiar enough to make my chest tighten. I shut the radio off, and the voice stopped with it. Silence rushed back in, heavier than sound. Then came the knock. One firm impact against the door, strong enough to rattle the frame. I backed away, heart hammering, every muscle coiled tight. The knock came again, followed by a pause that stretched too long. I held my breath. From just beyond the door, something inhaled deeply. The sound slid through the cracks in the wood, slow and satisfied, like it was tasting the air. A shape passed in front of the window, blocking out what little light remained. I did not look directly at it. I focused on the floor, on the scuffed boards and the dirt ground into the grain by boots long gone. The rule sheet lay curled at the edges, the last line burning in my mind. If it stands upright, you are already too close. A soft sound followed,
almost gentle. My name, spoken carefully, testing the shape of it. The voice was wrong in the same way the footsteps were wrong, stretched thin, copied from memory. I stayed silent. The station creaked as weight leaned against it, slow pressure building, then releasing. Eventually, the footsteps retreated, fading back into the trees. I did not sleep that night. I sat with my back to the wall, lights on, listening to the forest breathe until morning came, gray and cold and no comfort at all.
Morning brought fog, thick and low, rolling between the trees in slow, deliberate waves. It dulled sound and distance alike, turning the forest into a narrow world of pale shapes and muffled echoes. I stepped outside just long enough to confirm what I already suspected. The ground around the station was disturbed again, the soil pressed flat in wide arcs, as if something had stood there for a long time and shifted its weight slowly from side to side. The smell was strongest near the door, sharp and wet, making the back of my throat tighten. I documented everything with steady hands that didn't feel like mine, forcing myself through the motions of professionalism. Measurements, photos, notes written clearly and without speculation. Still, my eyes kept drifting to the tree line, half expecting to see something waiting just beyond the fog. Around mid-morning, the radio came alive without warning. This time there was no static, just a clean, open channel and a voice on the other end. It used my call sign correctly. It asked if I was settling in. Relief washed through me so fast it almost hurt. I answered immediately, explaining the tracks, the noises, the camera footage, the rules. There was a pause after I finished, long enough for doubt to creep back in. Then the voice responded, calm and measured. Acknowledged. Remain at the station. Do not leave the assigned area after sunset. Assistance will arrive when conditions allow. I asked when that would be. The channel went dead. The fog never lifted. By afternoon, the forest felt closer than ever, the trees looming just beyond sight, their trunks dark and wet. I busied myself with inventory checks and equipment maintenance, anything to keep my hands moving. Late in the day, I found something new near the edge of the clearing, a piece of fabric, dark green, torn cleanly along one edge. Ranger issue. I recognized it immediately. It was caught on a low branch, placed carefully rather than snagged. Beneath it, pressed into the mud, was a single impression deeper than the rest. It was shaped like a foot, but longer, the heel narrow, the front stretched forward too far. It faced the station. As the light began to fade, the fog thickened, swallowing the trees entirely. Sound returned in pieces, a distant crack, a slow drag through wet leaves. Then, closer now, a careful step. I retreated inside and locked the door, the rule sheet clenched tight in my hand. Outside, something moved through the fog, tall enough that its outline blurred above the low branches. I heard it pause just beyond the clearing, close enough that I could hear the soft shift of weight, the slow, steady breathing. The voice came again, clearer this time, almost gentle. It said my name the way someone familiar would. I did not answer. I did not move. And somewhere in the fog, something learned how long I could stay silent.
The second night began before the sun fully disappeared, the light thinning until the fog and darkness became the same thing. I shut off the exterior lights to avoid drawing attention, relying instead on a single lamp inside the station. Its glow barely reached the walls, leaving the corner swallowed in shadow. The forest answered the darkness with sound. Not immediately. First came the absence of noise, a pressure that settled into my ears until my own heartbeat felt too loud. Then a low creak echoed from somewhere deep among the trees, followed by the soft compression of soil under careful weight. The footsteps returned, closer than before.
They stopped just beyond the windows, close enough that I could hear the slow shift of balance, the faint brush of something tall against bark. The smell seeped through the station again, damp and sharp, filling my nose until it felt like breathing through wet cloth. I stayed still, eyes fixed on the rule sheet, my finger tracing the words as if they were an anchor. Do not respond. Do not follow. Do not photograph. The radio clicked on by itself. No static this time, just silence, open and waiting. Then the breathing came through the speaker, slow and steady, perfectly matching the rhythm outside the walls. I reached forward and shut the radio off, my hand trembling. Immediately, something struck the side of the building. Not a blow, a test. The wall bowed slightly, wood groaning in protest. Another press followed, heavier, patient, as if measuring the structure. I crouched near the desk, every muscle tight, listening to the station complain under the pressure. The window darkened as a shape leaned closer, tall enough that its upper outline vanished beyond the frame. I focused on the floor again, on the scuffs and scratches left by years of use. From just outside the door, the voice spoke softly, no longer distant. It listed small details about me, how long I'd been a ranger, where I'd trained, the model of my truck. Each fact landed carefully, like a step placed exactly where it would hurt the most. The pressure eased. Footsteps moved away, slow and unhurried. The smell lingered long after the sounds faded. I stayed frozen for hours until the forest finally went still again. When morning came, the fog had thinned just enough for me to see the damage. Long, pale marks scored the station walls. The wood scraped clean in places, pressed flat in others. Near the door, etched into the mud, were new impressions. Not tracks this time, lines, tall and vertical, spaced where something had stood upright for a long while, waiting.
I did not leave the station that morning. I documented the marks from the doorway, leaning out just far enough to take photos and measurements before retreating back inside. The vertical impressions near the door made my stomach turn the longer I looked at them. They were too evenly spaced, pressed straight down as if whatever made them had stood perfectly still, balanced and patient. The rule echoed in my head with quiet certainty. If it stands upright, you are already too close. I spent the day rationing food and checking my equipment, my movements slow and deliberate. The radio remained silent, no matter how many times I tried to raise the district office. Outside, the forest had resumed a false normalcy. A single bird called once from far away, then stopped. The fog lifted in thin strands, revealing the trees again, tall and unbroken, their bark scarred in places I hadn't noticed before. Late in the afternoon, I found another entry in the logbook that I was certain hadn't been there before. The ink was fresh, dark against the page. It read simply, "It learns faster when you are afraid." I backed away from the desk, my skin prickling. I hadn't heard the door open. I hadn't heard anything at all. As evening approached, the forest grew restless. Branches shifted without wind. Leaves stirred, though the air was still. I prepared for the night with mechanical focus. Lights low, rule sheet close, radio powered off completely. Darkness settled in heavier than ever. The footsteps came earlier this time, their slow rhythm cutting through the silence with intent. They did not circle the station, they stopped directly in front of the door. The smells surged, thick and wet, filling the room until my eyes burned. I held my breath. The handle turned slightly, testing, then stopped. From the other side, the voice spoke again, closer than it had ever been. It did not say my name this time. It asked a question, soft and curious, as if genuinely interested. "Why did you come here?" The wood creaked as weight leaned in, slow and steady. I stayed silent,
my hands pressed flat against the floor to keep them from shaking. After a long moment, the pressure eased. Footsteps retreated, not into the forest this time, but toward the rear of the station. Something brushed the wall as it passed, tall and narrow. Then, from somewhere behind me, inside the building, I heard a quiet sound. A floorboard shifted.
I froze, listening to the subtle creak beneath my feet, the faint shift of weight that should not have been there. Every instinct screamed that I was no longer alone inside the station. The lamp on the desk flickered, shadows dancing along the walls as if the darkness itself had gained motion. I gripped the rule sheet tighter, reading it again in a silent panic. Do not respond, do not follow, do not photograph. If it stands upright, you are already too close. My eyes darted toward the hallway leading to the storage room, the faint sound of breathing echoing from the other side. Not mine. Slow, deep, deliberate, like someone or something was testing the air, mapping the space before committing. I forced my legs to move, taking slow, cautious steps backward toward the main room, never taking my eyes off the hallway. Each board underfoot groaned softly, a warning I could barely bear. The radio sparked unexpectedly, static rolling in low waves, then clearing just enough for me to hear faint whispers layered beneath the hiss. The words were indistinct but intentional, like a voice carried from just outside my skull. I swallowed hard, pressing myself flat against the wall. My mind raced. The station had been my anchor, my safe space, and now it felt like a trap. Hours passed in tense silence. I did not hear it leave. I did not dare move from my position. When the first gray light of dawn crept through the small windows, the hallway was empty. The floorboards showed no sign of movement, not a single imprint, yet the smell remained, sharp and wet, wrapping around me like a second skin. I forced myself to breathe, slow and steady, and checked every corner of the main room. Nothing. No sign of entry, no marks, no tracks. Only the lingering awareness that something had been inside, patient, watching, waiting. I noted it all in the logbook, careful to describe only what I saw, not what I feared. And yet, in the back of my mind, I knew that fear had already been learned. Somewhere outside, in the trees, the forest waited.
That morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I walked the perimeter beyond the station. My boots sank into the damp earth, leaving clear impressions that felt wrong to look at, as if the ground itself resented being marked. The fog clung to the forest floor in low, rolling sheets, muffling sound and obscuring the distant trees. Branches dripped moisture onto my shoulders and hat, cold and wet, each drop a reminder of how alone I was. I followed the edge of the clearing carefully, flashlight off, relying on daylight even as it barely penetrated the thick canopy. Nothing moved, nothing stirred, and yet I felt it, watching, measuring. Each step I took seemed anticipated, accounted for. I noted fresh marks along the tree line, shallow impressions in the moss, spaced unnaturally, linear, too precise to be random animal movement. I knelt beside one, pressing a finger into the wet soil, cool and soft, but firm beneath. Something had stood there deliberately. The pattern led toward the denser forest and ended abruptly, the final impressions pressed flat, smooth, like the creature had stepped out of the earth itself. A shiver crawled down my spine. I had broken a rule by leaving the station. I had followed tracks, and the forest, I realized, had noticed. Back at the station, I closed and bolted the doors, but the relief was fleeting. The radio remained dead. The logbook lay open on the desk, the rule sheet curling at the edges. I sat in the chair, staring at the fog outside,
the morning gray turning slowly into muted daylight. Around midday, a sound came from the tree line, a soft, elongated snap, like a branch bending far too deliberately, followed by the faintest brush of something moving through the undergrowth. I did not rise. I did not move. I did not respond. The smell returned, pungent, wet, sharp, closer than ever. And somewhere in that fog, a presence waited, patient, learning again, watching how I would react.
The afternoon stretched endlessly, each minute marked by the slow drip of water from the eaves and the occasional rustle of leaves that could have been wind or something else. I stayed inside, keeping lights low, ears straining for the smallest sound. The station felt smaller than ever, the walls pressing in with every creak and groan. I traced the words of the rule sheet repeatedly, trying to anchor myself in reason. Do not respond. Do not follow. Do not photograph. If it stands upright, you are already too close. The fog returned in the late afternoon, thicker now, curling between the trees like a living thing. Outside, shapes shifted in the low light, not clear figures, just shadows brushing against trunks, too deliberate to be wind or stray leaves. Then came the sound of movement on the roof, light, careful steps, deliberate and unhurried, moving from one end to the other. My pulse hammered as I backed away from the windows. I forced myself to breathe, counting slowly in my head, trying not to look, trying not to imagine what was there. The radio sparked to life again, this time with faint static and a pattern beneath it, soft tapping like nails against wood. I reached for it instinctively and yanked it off. The steps stopped instantly. Silence returned. Then a sound from the floor above me, the attic. A slow, dragging noise, faint but deliberate. Something large was moving, testing its path. I held my breath, fingers pressed against the desk, waiting. Hours passed. Nothing else happened. By the time darkness fully fell, the forest outside had gone still, but the knowledge of its presence lingered, thick in the air, in the floorboards, in the smell that clung to me. I realized then, fully, that the station was no longer my refuge. It was part of the forest now, and whatever had entered would not leave.
That night, I did not try to sleep. The lamp cast a dim circle of light that barely reached the corners of the station, and the forest beyond was a wall of shifting gray and black. I stayed close to the rule sheet, tracing the words over and over, each repetition a small comfort. The footsteps returned just after midnight, slower than before, deliberate, measured. They circled the station once, twice, each pass leaving the faintest impression in the damp soil outside. The smell followed, wet, sharp, musky, filling the room so completely I felt it in my chest. I did not move. I did not respond. The radio clicked on again. Static rolled through the room, then a whisper, low and deliberate, repeating my name. I ignored it. From outside, something pressed against the walls, a weight slow and patient, testing. I could feel it through the floorboards, a faint brushing against the window, then silence. Then, directly behind me, from inside the station, a soft, slow creak of the floor. Not just one board, several. Something had moved, carefully, upright, patient, inside the station while I stayed frozen. Hours passed. I counted my breaths, my heart, the seconds ticking by. By the faint gray of pre-dawn, all sounds had ceased. I checked the station. No marks, no tracks, nothing inside to suggest anything had moved there. Only the lingering smell. I wrote it all in the logbook, precise and factual. And I realized with a chill that the forest outside had learned every movement I made. Every step, every glance, every breath had been noted. And whatever it was, it would be back tonight.
The next day, I barely left the station. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, muted and gray, doing little to ease the tension that had settled over me. I rationed food and water, my movements slow and deliberate, each one measured against the rules I'd memorized. Outside, the forest seemed to hold its breath, every tree and branch still, as if waiting for me to make a mistake. Around midday, I stepped just outside the door to check the perimeter again, careful to stay within sight lines and not follow any tracks that ended abruptly. The impressions from the previous night were gone, replaced by flat, undisturbed earth, as if nothing had been there at all. A shiver ran through me. The creature, or whatever it was patient. It erased its movements. The fog began rolling back in by late afternoon, thick and cold, curling between the trees like smoke. Shadows shifted within it, slow and deliberate. I stayed inside, lights low, watching the outlines stretch and blur. Then came the sound, faint tapping at the windows, slow, patient, almost testing. I held my breath. The radio clicked on, static filling the space, then the faintest echo of a voice. It asked a question I could barely comprehend, drawn out and deliberate. "Are you learning?" I did not answer. The sound outside shifted, as if it had considered my silence and decided it was acceptable, for now. The steps retreated to the rear of the station. I could hear them brushing against the walls, moving slowly, purposefully. The smell followed them, damp and musky, filling the room, settling in the corners, wrapping around me. I stayed upright, chair pressed against the desk, eyes fixed on the rule sheet. Hours passed. Darkness fell again, thicker than before, heavier. And somewhere in the forest, I knew it waited, patient, upright, and watching how long I could endure its presence. That night, I didn't try to eat. I sat in the corner of the station, the rule sheet on my lap, tracing the words over and over. The lamp cast a dim pool of light, leaving the rest of the room shadowed, as if the darkness itself was pressing closer. Around 10, the footsteps returned. Not circling this time, they approached the front door directly, slow and deliberate, each step measured. The floorboards of the station groaned under my own weight as I shifted slightly, trying not to make noise. Outside, a shadow passed in front of the window. Tall, too tall, narrow, elongated. The smell pressed against the glass, damp, musky, sharp. I didn't breathe. The radio clicked on, static first, then a low, deliberate whisper, repeating the same phrase over and over. "Why are you here?" My throat tightened. I stayed silent. The voice changed, slower, testing, almost curious. I could feel the pressure of it leaning against the building, shifting slightly, brushing against walls, stretching its shadow across the clearing. Hours passed. The night dragged on. Every creak of the building sounded like a footstep, every small shift of air a breath. I didn't sleep. Dawn came, gray and faint. The fog lingered, curling low to the ground, the forest quiet but alive, holding its breath. I checked the perimeter. No tracks, nothing. Yet the impression of its presence remained, deep in the soil near the station, and in the air inside, the smell that refused to fade. The rules were clear. I had broken them all. And somewhere beyond the trees, I could sense it had learned everything about me. Patient, upright, waiting for me to make another mistake. The next day passed in a haze of fear and routine. I avoided leaving the station, rationed food, and kept the lights low. Every sound outside made me tense, every shift of leaves or twig snap sending my heart racing. Around midday, I reviewed the camera footage again, hoping for any clue,
any error I had missed. Most of it was static or empty forest, but one frame stopped me cold. A tall, thin shape stood at the edge of the clearing, blurred at the top, as if stretching beyond the frame. It did not move. It simply observed. I rewound the tape, watched it again and again, but each time the figure's position changed slightly, as if it was testing my patience, learning my reactions. By afternoon, the fog began to roll in again, thick and suffocating. Shadows deepened beneath the trees, shifting as if alive. The forest pressed closer, the canopy blocking light, until the station felt trapped in twilight, even in full daylight. Around evening, the tapping started again, slow, deliberate, counting my nerves like a metronome. Then the smell arrived, sharp and damp, closer than ever. I pressed myself against the desk, clutching the rule sheet, reading the last line repeatedly. If it stands upright, you are already too close. The footsteps circled the building once, twice, then stopped at the front door. I did not move. The radio clicked on, whispering faintly, "I see you." Silence followed. Then, from the back of the station, I heard it, a slow, dragging shift, like weight sliding along the floorboards. Something had moved inside while I sat frozen, upright, obeying the rules. By the time the faint gray light of dawn filtered in, the footsteps had faded. The impressions in the mud outside were gone, erased. But the lingering smell, damp and musky, remained, as if marking the space, a warning, patient and deliberate. I realized fully then, it had learned everything, including my fear.
That day, I did not step outside. I did not eat. I barely moved from the corner where the lamp's light pooled on the floor. The forest pressed close, even through the walls, each branch and leaf seeming to shift just out of sight, moving as if it knew I was watching. Around midday, I heard it again, faint but deliberate, the slow dragging of weight, careful, upright, moving along the edge of the clearing. I did not respond. I did not look. I forced my focus to the rule sheet, tracing the words over and over. Do not respond. Do not follow. Do not photograph. If it stands upright, you are already too close. By late afternoon, the radio clicked on, static first, then a whisper, low and deliberate, repeating my name. I ignored it. The smell arrived soon after, damp, sharp, musky, filling the station in layers. It wrapped around me, seeping into the walls, into the floor, into the corners I could not reach. Hours passed with nothing else, just silence, tense and heavy, broken only by the occasional creak of the station settling. Then, at twilight, I heard it outside the window, a soft, testing tap, followed by the low sound of weight shifting, deliberate, upright. It stopped. I did not breathe. I did not move. The lamp flickered once, then stabilized. The footsteps retreated, circling the building slowly, then fading into the forest. Darkness fell fully, and I stayed upright, tracing the rule sheet, every nerve taut. I knew it would return tonight. I knew it had learned everything about me. And somewhere beyond the trees, patient and upright, it waited, watching how long I could endure.
That night, the forest seemed closer than ever. The fog rolled in thick, curling around the station like fingers, muting every distant sound until even the birds and wind disappeared. I stayed pressed against the desk, the rule sheet clutched in my hands, reading it over and over. Every line burned into my mind. Do not respond. Do not follow. Do not photograph. If it stands upright, you are already too close. The footsteps began earlier than usual, not circling, not tentative, direct, deliberate, approaching the front door in slow, patient rhythm. The floorboards inside groaned under my own weight as I shifted slightly, my ears straining for any hint of its motion beyond the walls. The smell arrived almost simultaneously, thick, wet, musky, clinging to the air like smoke that won't leave. I forced myself to stay still, upright, unresponsive. The radio sparked to life, static rolling, then fading into a faint whisper. It was neither my name nor words I could understand, just sounds shaped like speech, drawn slowly, intentionally. I did not answer. From outside, the tapping began again, soft, testing, deliberate. I counted them in my mind, each tap a measure of patience, of attention. Then a scrape along the siding, low and precise, as if something was testing the station's boundaries, its strength, its weaknesses. I pressed myself flat against the corner, every nerve strung tight. Hours passed. The tapping stopped. The dragging sounds from the back of the station ceased. Silence returned, but the air felt heavier, charged with presence. When dawn finally broke, thin and gray, I dared to step to the door. Outside, the ground bore no tracks, nothing, and yet the soil at the edge of the clearing was pressed flat in a single vertical line, as if something had stood there, upright, patient, and waiting. I realized then fully that it had not left. It never leaves. It watches, learns, and waits. Somewhere deep in the trees, patient, upright, it remained, knowing that I had seen enough to understand the rules, but not enough to escape.
That day passed in a tense blur. I did not leave the station. I barely ate, barely drank, barely breathed beyond what was necessary. The forest outside remained unnervingly still, the fog lingering in low sheets that twisted between the trees. Every so often, a branch would shift, leaves would brush together, and my pulse would spike, though no visible movement ever appeared. Around midday, I reviewed the logbook and the rule sheet again. The words felt heavier now, not just instructions, but warnings, etched into my mind like nails. Do not respond, do not follow, do not photograph. If it stands upright, you are already too close. I traced the lines repeatedly, counting my breaths, hoping repetition might somehow ward off what I knew was inevitable. By late afternoon, the fog thickened, muting sound, bending light, creating shapes in the shadows that were too precise, too deliberate to be natural. The tapping started again, soft at first, then sharper, measured, circling the station in a way that felt like it was testing me. The smell returned with it, pungent, wet, musky, carrying an almost tangible weight. I remained still, pressing against the corner, upright, heart pounding. The radio came alive again, static first, then low whispers in a cadence I could not place. The voice, or whatever it was, did not speak words I recognized, only phrases shaped like thought, probing, observing, patient. Hours dragged. By the time the gray of pre-dawn began to creep through the windows, the sounds had faded. The impressions in the soil were gone. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the trees once more. But I could feel it, watching, patient, upright, waiting. And I knew, with a deep certainty, that tonight would not be the last night. It never is. The forest holds it, preserves it, teaches it, and somewhere beyond the clearing, it learned more about me than I had learned about it.
Night returned faster than I expected. The forest swallowed the light quickly,
leaving only the dim glow of the lamp inside the station. I remained in the corner, the rule sheet in my hands, tracing the words repeatedly. Do not respond. Do not follow. Do not photograph. If it stands upright, you are already too close. The footsteps started just after darkness fell, slow, deliberate, approaching the station from the rear. I did not move. The air grew thick with the damp, musky smell I had learned to recognize, wrapping around the walls, the floor, me. The radio sparked to life. This time there were words, though distorted and drawn out. "Why do you stay?" it whispered, patient, probing, testing. I did not answer. The tapping returned, gentle at first, then measured, moving around the perimeter. I could hear it brushing against the siding, testing the station's boundaries. The floorboards groaned faintly under my own weight, betraying my tense movements. Hours passed in this slow, calculated rhythm of sound and silence. Then, a soft, dragging scrape came from the attic above, deliberate and patient. I pressed myself against the desk, afraid to breathe, afraid to move. The night stretched endlessly, each second heavy with tension. When dawn finally arrived, gray and thin, the fog rolled in again. Outside, the soil bore no marks of passage, no tracks, nothing to explain the presence I had felt all night. But the smell lingered, heavier than ever. It had not left. It waited, upright, patient and unrelenting, teaching me that I was already too close. I understood then that the rules were not suggestions. They were survival.
That day, I did not step outside at all. I stayed near the desk, the rule sheet clutched tightly, tracing its words over and over. Do not respond. Do not follow. Do not photograph. If it stands upright, you are already too close. Every sound in the forest made my heart hammer, the rustle of leaves, a branch snapping, the soft shift of earth. The fog clung low, thickening as evening approached, hiding shapes and movements I could not see but could feel. Around dusk, the footsteps returned, slow and measured, circling the station, testing, learning my reactions. I remained upright, pressed to the corner, silent, unmoving. The smell followed, wet, musky, thick, filling the room and pressing against my skin. Then the radio clicked on, static first, then a whisper, low and deliberate. You cannot leave. I did not answer. From outside, a tap sounded at the window, deliberate, patient, almost a question. I counted the seconds, counting each one as if it were a warning. A soft, dragging sound came from the back of the station, inside the walls, as if something was moving upright, testing, mapping the space. I did not move. Hours passed. Darkness stretched endlessly. When gray light crept in at dawn, I finally dared to step to the window. The forest appeared still, undisturbed, but the soil near the clearing bore a single vertical impression, tall and narrow, pressed perfectly upright. The rule sheet's final line echoed in my mind. If it stands upright, you are already too close. I realized then that I had already crossed the line. It had learned me completely. And somewhere in the fog, patient and upright, it waited for the night to fall again. There would be no escape. The forest had claimed me.
Night returned, like a weight pressing down. I did not try to sleep. The lamp's glow barely reached the corners of the station, leaving shadows thick and alive. The fog crept close, curling under the windows and around the building, moving as if it had purpose. Footsteps began again, slow, deliberate, circling the station. I remained upright, pressed into the corner, Hands clenched around the rule sheet. The smell arrived with them, wet, musky, thick, invading every breath. The radio sparked to life, whispering again, low, distorted. "You belong here now." I did not answer. A soft tap came at the window, then another, precise and deliberate. My pulse thundered in my ears. From behind me, a drag along the floorboards, subtle but deliberate, upright movement inside the station. Hours passed. Darkness pressed against the walls, the fog thickened, the forest whispered in shapes I could not see. By dawn, the footsteps had faded, the taps gone. Outside, the soil bore no new marks, but a single vertical impression remained, tall, narrow, perfectly upright, pressed deep into the earth. I traced the words of the rule sheet one final time. "If it stands upright, you are already too close." I understood fully then. I